I believe the interim arrangements represent a new dawn at Eskom, which recorded positive results according to its financial results presented to the AGM today. The company is in a better financial position than it was a year and 2 years ago. Eskom will announce their integrated financial statements on the 12th of July 27. I've asked Eskom's new leadership to roll up its collective sleeves and immediately address 3 issues of primary importance: the management of contracts, the conflicts of interest, and the quality of coal supplied to Eskom.
That is, of course, a former Public Enterprises Minister, Lynn Brown, who herself is implicated in terms of lying to Parliament. And, of course, we know of her relationship with the Guptas, especially through her personal assistant and her mother. Here on The Fix, we like to get to the heart of things. And in the hot spot this morning is Eskom chairperson, Mr. Jabu Mabuza. Mr. Mabuza, welcome to The Fix. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Karima. Good morning, Peter.
Morning.
Now, I chose that clip specifically to try and locate the origins and the nexus of the problem at Eskom. You are in your place for less than 8 months, and you are only beginning to see the extent to which the place was in fact run down. Basic things like Kusile and Medupi, their output, the quality of the coal, the maintenance, none of that was done. Eskom was basically used to just loot the state. Given that reality, how are you going to turn this organization around? Have you, for example, gotten rid of all those who were aligned to the Gupta project? Pravin Gordhan was very clear when he said, those people that keep on tweeting about Eskom, it's treasonous to actually undermine the public utility in this way.
Yeah, well, Karima, that clip is a good backdrop. The 3 points that the former Minister Brown closes by: contracts, conflict of interest, and the quality of coal supply. Yeah, those remain the Achilles heels of the organization. So when we got here, as you said, early February, we were asked at the time to deal with governance issues, liquidity issues, release the interim results for the period having ended in September the previous year, and otherwise we would have had our bonds being delisted, and to get rid of some of the malfeasance and some of deal with the culprits. So that's what we spent a lot of time doing, but we did not just address that particular situation where we've seen a lot of executives separating with the organization, a lot of charges being laid against those that have been found somewhat complicit in the space, and also having done some recovery. As you recall, we got some money back from McKinsey, and we continue to lay charges to pursue some criminal activities on some companies and indeed some of our former executives. So that is the part that I think we spent more time on. Regrettably, we lost a good 6-8 weeks during June, July, whilst we were facing our industrial relation issues, which did not help, the end of which just culminated in a bigger problem from a cost point of view. So I have been saying to my colleagues, we can spend a lot of time focusing on how we got here. I think we should now start to turn our attention on where are we and what are we doing about it. That being said, there's only 12 members of the board, and as I indicated in the announcement of the results, Karima, we really don't know what we don't know. Every day we find different parts of the problem. But problems fall in three main categories. The first one is over time, Eskom management, its board, and the shareholder have not invested in maintenance of plant. I was told by some of the engineers that there are four priorities that faces an engineering operation. The first one, they've got to do what they call safety, and the second one is some of the statutory things that they need to do. Thirdly, environmental things, and then lastly, things that in terms of the OEM are things that must be done. So in an engineering a situation like what Eskom is, there are certain schedules. When you buy your car, the OEM tells you you've got to bring the car in for service for 10,000, you've got to bring it. So, because there are those schedules, because when you look at something like the turbines, there's a particular time by when you've got to change the whole mechanism and the whole fan. Otherwise, this stuff is going to break.
Absolutely.
So
Mr. Mabuza, I want you to just pause there. I want us to listen to Minister Pravin Gordhan at the press conference where he explained some of these things. We'll come back to the question of the lack of maintenance, but also more importantly, how you're going to raise the money that you require, because there's this amount that is floating around, and of course, everyone is worried that the exposure to the fiscus will be a disaster. Let's listen to Minister Pravin Gordhan.
This was an institution, just in case you've forgotten, that was one of the centers of state capture. And part of the state capture process, by now I'm sure you've learned, although we tend to forget these things, was to ensure that you have the right minister in place, you have the right board in place, you have the right compliant management in place, good, honest people with the right level of technical skills are either pushed aside, or they're forced to leave, or they are victimized in some kind of way. And today, you begin to feel the effects of state capture on the one hand, but also the reality that you have very old power stations that are operating.
That is, of course, Pravin Gordhan sketching that background. Peter, you wanted to get in?
I just wanted to ask, Jabu, you have an article in Business Times today on page 9. I don't know whether you've seen it this morning. It's an extract from a speech you delivered in Steenberg.
Yes.
And right next door to it is an interview with the executive director of the South African Manufacturing Circle. And what she's saying is that basically manufacturers, people who are investing money in the economy, need to know what your plans are. And it's not a bad request, because we don't know what your plans are, and we don't know what the strategy is. Are we going to one day see Eskom broken up into its, generating and transmission components? Do we try and save it all? Should we go into business rescue rather than try and turn it around? What are you thinking, and where are we going?
Peter, firstly, and I'm going to deal with it right now. Just wanted to say there are those immediate and short-term problems that we're dealing with, but in the longer term, Eskom to be put on a sustainable business, Peter, like any other business, there are three main buckets that we are looking at. In any other business, the big issue, you can control your costs. You can't control much your revenue, but you can control your cost. So, and in the case of Eskom, assuming they were maintaining the plant and it was working well, going forward, you need to, if you don't address your coal supply, your labor, and your debt servicing, you are not dealing with your costs. So you've got to come with something on your cost. But whilst we're doing this, one of the approaches, and I did say this at the announcement of our interim results, but the way we are approaching this is we have taken the decision as a board that it's important to look at the components of the utility in their own standalone basis in the context of its own P&L. Look at generation as generation, look at transmission as transmission, look at the distribution and the other functions in their own. I do that in my household. Every business does that in that way. here you have a big challenge that everything is in one pot, which makes it difficult to have a transparent view in the business to see what is it that is efficient and what is it that is not efficient, which then carries on in the bigger debate when you have with the regulator on your tariff applications. Because the regulator keeps throwing back an answer to say, we don't know how much of your costs are corruption, we don't know how much of your costs are imprudence. You ask for 16%, they give you 8%, you ask for 19%, they give you 4%. There is no cost reflectivity on the one side. On the other side, there's no cost exemplarity and prudence and efficient management on the side of the utility. So that's the one part. The second part, one has to, so you need to look at your cost. As I said, the three main drivers of your cost at Eskom is people, debt, and coal supply, primary energy. If you are not dealing with those three things, you are not dealing with your cost issues. The second part is, of course, on your revenue. On the revenue side, there are things that you need to do in getting the tariff that hopefully is cost reflective. Between the tariff that's cost reflective and the tariff that society can tolerate, there is a delta. Someone has to address the delta. The fact that people don't afford it does not mean that's not what it costs. So someone has to transparently say, we know it costs X, there is no more a debate. You could benchmark us against anybody on generation to generation, transmission to transmission, this is what it costs. But here in the South African context, between what it costs and that which society can afford, there's this delta. This delta, this is how we're going to deal with it. It's an important point. The next, third point is, of course, debt in its nature is debt that has not started in February this year, is debt that has been building up over the years. And secondly, I don't have a mandate that says you've got to run Eskom, keep the lights on at all costs. I've got a mandate that says keep lights on within costs. Because there's just a certain amount of money you can get. So the debt that you have, because it's historic in its nature, it continues to have, you know, that old game of a compounding interest. The debt that you have, that particular debt I was talking about, we are currently funding on the strength of, on the balance sheet of Eskom to fund those people that either cannot afford or can but don't want to pay. You know the story about the municipality. So we have been to the shareholder to say, on the short term, this is what we're doing. On the medium term, these are the band-aid suggestions, these are the stitching suggestions, this is the surgery that is required. On the longer term, 3 to the next 5 years, we have put a proposal. We have undertaken that by September we'll put in a turnaround plan. We went, it took us longer to get consulting agencies that were going to validate and stress test our hypothesis on what to do. We have now done that. We have been working with our minister. We have presented to the minister. Admittedly, we still have to go. So let me conclude. We still have to go and take Treasury on this and take Department of Energy on this. So that's where the issue is at.
Will you ask the government for a bailout or a guarantee so that you can function? And what is that amount? Because different amounts have been bandied around. At the press conference, no one wanted to answer this question. Can you tell us categorically how much are you asking from government and what is the basis of the agreement you want with government?
Karima, I can't, but the minister gave a directive the other day. We have presented a proposal to government on how to deal with our costs, both people, coal, and debt servicing. We have presented to government how to, on revenue, on the tariff assumptions, on the revenue enhancement methodologies, and we've also presented a proposal to government on how we should deal with our debt. We have presented that, Jabu. And we have presented a number. We are still working with government, as the minister said, but as I must emphasize, we have not yet been in a position to go and present this to Minister of Finance, and this is the story. In our view, it was important that once we have agreed with our minister that we have looked for many other ways, this is the only way we've settled on, was to then go and socialize this view with the president, given that it's got a lot of ramification. Not the least are
there
political, some are very social.
Is there any way that the public would get to understand what you're presenting now to your minister?
Yeah.
To your minister?
Definitely.
When?
Eskom is a public enterprise, and the minister has indicated by end of January, hopefully, we would have reached a point that government has, in its own internal processes, reached a point where they come back to us, and say, Mabuza, in your report, you're smoking your socks. This is not the solution. Or Mabuza, yes, we think, firstly, your diagnosis of the problem is correct, and your prescription of how it should be solved is correct. That's all that should be expected of me as a manager, to come with a detailed plan of addressing what has been agreed as a problem.
All right, Mr. Mabuza, we will have to leave it there. Thank you very much. That is, of course, the chairperson of Eskom, Mr. Mabuza, speaking to us on the program. Still ahead on The Fix, we examine the extent of the crisis at the public broadcaster.